Welcome to Happily Ever After, the podcast that talks about the mysterious world of divorce and uncoupling and living happily ever after heartbreak. I'm your host, Hannah Harvey. I'm a writer and an award-winning blogger at mumsdays.com. That's mumsdays.com. It would make my day if you could subscribe and leave a review so more people can find this podcast. I would also love to hear from you, so contact me through Instagram at mumsdays with your stories of divorce and heartbreak, any thoughts that you might have on the episode, or even questions you may want answering. You can find all the details from this episode in the show notes. Hello and welcome to Happily Ever After. This is Hannah, and today I'm talking to Sean Alexander, who's the author of Sober on a Drunk Planet. So I quit drinking myself about 5 years ago, almost to the day. So I wanted to speak to Sean almost as a sort of celebration of this anniversary, but also because I'm now fascinated by the subject of addiction, and in particular, how it can impact on relationships. But before we get on to relationships and addiction, Sean, hello.
Hi.
Would you mind giving a little bit of background about your drinking and drugs and how you've ended up writing this book?
Yeah, I'll try and give the short version. Addicts are quite are known for talking about their past quite well. So I was born and raised in Wimbledon in southwest London, where the tennis is. Easiest place for people to remember it. Privileged upbringing, no council estate or any sort of known trauma. Like mum and dad were amazing. Went to a good school. Went to university up in Nottingham, lived up there for 3 years, and then didn't get into drugs till after I left uni. So I then started working in a pub. When you work in a pub, especially in South London, drugs and drink is easy to get as one or the other. Mm-hmm. So the pub I used to work in probably had 5 or 6 dealers that would work from there, out from there every day. And it was just part and parcel of life. Like, I'm 36 years old now, so when I was there, it was so easily accessible. But it started off as once a month, once a week, twice a week, during the week. And then before I knew it, I was in rehab at the age of 31. Worked in finance. I was a qualified financial advisor, qualified pensions advisor. So had a house, very close to having a wife to be as well. Sort of a bit of a car crash addiction. I gambled all my money away. Sold my house to pay off the debts, and then did exactly the same thing again, just with a lot more money. But luckily, losing all the money was the thing that actually was the catalyst for me getting help. Sort of the prospect of being homeless sort of got me into rehab, and it was a bit of a strange thing. I was working as an investment consultant, earning a good salary, but my lifestyle was crazy. Loads of drugs every day, drinking, just not doing all the things that I learned doing my financial advice qualifications. And then, so I'd run out of money. I couldn't even afford to get into work. All my credit cards were completely maxed out. Gambling was a problem again. And then all I had was a private medical policy with work at the time, that got me a 28-day stay at rehab. And then that luckily was the turning point, really. Like, I went to rehab because I needed an excuse to say that I didn't have any money. But actually, I knew deep down when I walked into that room in rehab with loads of other strange looking people all lost, I felt very at home. So, I went to rehab, the Priory in London. It was like the top care you could get. So I was very fortunate. But a lot of people come out of it and they relapse. I think it's like a 95% relapse rate. But I'd already gone through years of trying to quit, telling people I had a problem, sort of one car crash after another, loads of things going wrong. Um, and then, yeah, just sort of the penny dropped when I was in rehab. We spoke about my drinking habits. I'd never contemplated drinking was a problem because I drank like everyone else from university. You'd black out, you wouldn't remember things, you'd wake up, there'd be sick everywhere. Um, and it was that sort of normality with the people that I was drinking with. It never felt like it was a problem. But actually, when you go to rehab and they look at your pattern of drinking and the behavior associated with it, it's very obvious that I had an addiction with alcohol. It might not be your stereotypical one where you're drinking 2 bottles of wine in the morning to function. I wasn't a functioning alcoholic. I was a binge drinker. I'd go out Thursday to Sunday and just drink and drug until I got to Sunday, and then I'd sleep for about 14 hours before going to work on Monday, and lived in that same repeatable nightmare for best part of 17 years. Like when you're younger, you sort of get away with it a bit more because your liver's better to detoxify itself and the hangovers don't last all week. But I don't know if you found with age, hangovers seem to drag on all week.
Definitely. Um, it's funny because I think for me, I people will often be like, "Oh, you just drank the same amount I did, or I do." Um, but I felt like I had a problem, so I wasn't doing what you were doing necessarily, and adding drugs into the mix. But there was definitely this underlying requirement to drink almost. Um, I think you touch upon it lots in the book, and it's that kind of feeling of something's not quite right, and you're trying to fill a void. But my point is that there's lots of different levels that you don't have to have been going out every single night of the week, and like you say, getting up and drinking all day. It can be as simple as you're thinking about it a bit too much. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think that's when I was at rehab. One person's problem with alcohol was completely different to someone else's. I mean, it's the same principle that you use alcohol, which is a drug. Like to me, there's no difference between me snorting a line of cocaine or drinking too many pints. Drinking too many pints inevitably got me arrested a few times, whereas snorting cocaine didn't. So I actually think alcohol's worse than the other drugs. But equally, they're all pretty bad. Um, but it's such a it's such a spectrum of, is it just a bad habit? And then I think that it was like the perfect storm of things going wrong. And then you sort of drink a bit more often, and then I was drinking every day and doing drugs every day because that was my coping mechanism. So filling that void where I didn't want to face up to the fact that my life was completely spiraling out of control. Um, Being a typical bloke, I didn't have that emotional intelligence to ask for help or even know what was wrong. It's that whole thing of if someone says, "Oh, how are you?" and I would just say, "Oh, I'm fine," but deep down there were a lot of things going wrong. But sort of adulting and not wanting people to see that you're struggling was just a big problem of mine. So I just kept everything quiet until eventually I managed to spend an awful lot of money in about 10 years all in all. And then, yeah, all the gambling and stuff escalates. And gambling's quite dangerous because a lot of people don't realize you can talk about alcohol and drug addiction, but gambling addiction can completely destroy you in a matter of an hour.
Mm.
Drinking and drugging, yeah, you can overdose, but there's a bit of a bigger lead up to getting to that point. Whereas gambling is so rife and so accepted in society that it's it's a lot more obvious. I know you've got pubs and you've got shops you can buy alcohol, but you almost don't have that level of advertising. or association with sports. It's definitely more of a male thing.
Mm.
I think I've personally not met many um, females in sort of Gamblers Anonymous or anything, but I'm sure there's more with the sort of daytime betting with all these bingo things that really annoy me.
I
The
think that's
Foxy
becoming,
bingo and stuff like that.
yeah, much more of a thing. I think they've spotted a gap in the market and they're like, how can we get women in on this as well? And
Yeah,
it's going to do bingo. I personally don't get it, but I can understand what it is about it that people like. Um, yeah, it's really interesting. So, the thing I wanted to talk to you about is the fact that I guess it's for the person who isn't the addict. So, you mentioned in the book, and specifically relationship section, about how if you quit, what happens with your partner um, can go one of two ways. So, one is they quit too, and because they're not really that big a drinker and it's not a big a deal, or they just want to, or they don't, and it can become an issue. Um, and what's coming up quite a lot in the community that um, we have here is people talking about their partner's drinking or drug taking or other addiction, gambling. People do talk about that too, and how much of a negative impact it's having on the relationship, um, to the point where they feel they have to leave. And I know it's like a really common issue within relationships. I don't know whether it's like an age thing or just because we grew up just drinking. I worked at the university and everywhere we went, there was free booze. You know, if you go to a conference, it's like, oh, you plan where you're going to go at a conference based on where the free booze is going to be. So I don't know if it's just because we've grown up doing it and you just get used to drinking a lot, but
yeah, it
I,
definitely it is a societal thing. I grew up with my mum doesn't really drink, but my dad was part of a rugby society, played rugby, and they all drink. All their partners drink. So all the guys and all the friends that I grew up with all drink. You go to university, and if you don't drink at university, I mean, it's pretty alien. And then the corporate world's the worst. Everything I did in the finance industry was drinks related. There
yeah,
wasn't anything. I think I did a crystal maze thing once in the 13, 14 years I worked in the finance industry. But all the other events were drink related. And drink inevitably leads on to um, lower inhibitions, which makes gambling worse, which makes drugs like literally 1 pint, 2 pints, and you call your dealer. You get home, you're wide awake, and then you gamble. I think they're more intrinsically linked than people would normally think. I think if you cut out drinking, then at least you're giving yourself half a chance of trying to stop the other addictions as well.
yes. Oh my God. I'll talk about that later about when I left my ex and how grateful I am that I don't drink.
Yeah.
But so going back to the relationship thing, it feels like for a lot of people it's really taboo. Like they're really struggling with this thing, but they've got no one to talk to. And it's like a dirty secret within the relationship that just becomes utterly toxic. Um, were you in a relationship when you were drinking, and do you have some like experience of that kind of the
Yeah, it was.
impact it has?
It's from my perspective, so it's obviously going to be a bit different, and it's strange because I never really had any sort of closure or anything with the girlfriend at the time. But we were sort of at that point. We moved in together. Everyone was thinking that we were going to get married, do that usual 2 kids, and live like everyone else expects you to. But I guess I wasn't happy in the relationship because I wouldn't have turned to drink and drugs if I was happy. So I told her that I was a coke addict. She didn't really have a clue. I was doing coke every day in the toilet, blamed it on IBS, irritable bowel syndrome. That's why I was always in the loo. And then when I told her, she was shocked. She made me ring my dad. My dad was pissed off. And then she just left. I mean, she just didn't even try or anything. And there was definitely some resentment from me. But I was so numb to everything because my life had literally spiraled out of control by that point. That she made the right decision. I mean, you see it all the time, even when I was counselling clients as well. You get people that enable something. So I guess to some extent it's codependency. Even if you know deep down that you don't necessarily like the person in the relationship, and it doesn't always have to be that strong a feeling. It could be you know that that person isn't the person you want to spend the rest of your life with, but you can both tolerate each other. And the thought of splitting up and being single and all that is too much. So I think you stick to it, even though you're not particularly happy. But then that sort of fuels the drinking and the drugging as well. And I think that for me, that was a side effect of it. But because I was emotionally redundant, I didn't really know how to convey it. So I kept turning to drink and drugs instead, which obviously is not the solution to trying to work through relationship problems. But I see it all the time. Like I used to grow up with a lot of builders, a lot of manual labourers, and that emotional intelligence is never passed down through the male generations. You don't have men talking openly about relationship problems and how to overcome them. You just have men saying, "Let's go to the pub and get fucked and let's forget about it." And that's generally how we used to regulate our emotions, was down the pub.
And do the guys have going for one?
Yeah, I was never friends with a guy that just went for one, not one.
I didn't know they existed until I
I
quit.
don't think they do.
They do. Well,
Really?
yeah, I think so. I
Skeptical.
don't understand it, but I think so. Do you think if your girlfriend had said, let's get you some help, go to rehab or some kind of couples therapy, that at that point you would have heard what she had to say or would have been open to the idea?
Yeah, it's difficult. I think everything in life pans out how it should do, but I think um, to go from not trying anything to just leaving, I
Yeah.
still think that was probably, especially when we were apparently in love. I, knowing what I know now, I would not leave my other half if they went through a bit of a wobble. I'd like to know that I knew the signs were there beforehand, but I think yeah, if you really do like the other person, then you should go through the motions of trying, because at worst case scenario, you'll come out of the therapy sessions, whether it's joint or individual or both, and you'll get a load of insight into how you operate and how your part in it as well. Sometimes it gives a bit of closure, and sometimes it gives you the clarity you need to make the decisions.
Mm. One person in particular I'm thinking of felt like they had done everything they can, and it's like a circle. So your partner might quit for a little while and then something happens and it starts again. And you do the therapy, you do the couples therapy, and I guess it's the time when you go, nothing that we're doing and nothing that we're trying to do here is working, so I need to leave. And I think it's that you can really be the enabler for absolutely years if you want to, under the guise that the other person feels that you should, if you're in love, you should keep putting up with their behavior. And I think a lot of people feel guilty for then choosing to leave because they're like, I feel like I've tried everything and nothing is working. And I guess it's almost like you have to give yourself permission to say, this person's not going to change while I'm around. Do, do you understand where I'm coming from?
Yeah,
Have you
definitely.
seen much of that where you feel like people have really, really tried, but you know,
Yeah, I was counselling when I was counselling some clients about a year ago. That it was family. Family were enabling their behaviours through money. So it works in different ways. So you could be enabling your other half by staying with them, or you can be enabling them if they're a relative by giving them money and they're telling you all these white lies. Um, and it's difficult because at the end of the day, we don't like doing things that are uncomfortable. I mean, the whole human nature is to do things that are comfortable. The whole body is system to stay in that comfort zone. So when you have to go through those and make those decisions, I think logically it makes more sense if you go through the motions of doing all the therapy, trying trying and then getting to that point where you think that I've got nothing more to give, like the relationship's dead. That person's that's that person's life at the end of the day. As selfish as it feels like, sometimes that could be the making of the other person. So, like for me personally, when she left, it was a bitter pill to swallow, but I had to realise that all my problems were my problems. And until I finally got the help that I needed, and I wanted to get help, no one was going to change me. Because you get fixers in relationships as well.
mm,
So the girlfriend at the time, obviously wasn't a fixer. She was the polar opposite. But sometimes if you get fixers, they'll keep thinking they'll change for me, they'll change for me. But over time, I think you'll realise that they won't. And you've been wasting time, whether it's wasting time or whether it's just that time you need to realise actually it is what it is. I know some people stay in relationships for almost their entire lives and they're not happy. So it really is a spectrum of at what point do you leave, and to what extent do people tolerate not being happy as well. I've seen it so many times. People are unhappy, but they won't leave. It's a
yeah.
bit of a like codependency is another addiction. It's exactly the same as drinking too much alcohol. You've got too much dependence on one person, it becomes toxic.
Mm-hmm. Because yeah, I think 5 years into my journey, and I'm like, it wasn't just about booze. That was a big thing that I leaned on, but I could say the same for sugar, and um, and I do think codependency. So when I left my ex, it was almost worse for me than quitting alcohol because um, with drinking, I just woke up one day and went, this is not working for me. Like we were trying for another baby or thinking about it anyway. And I was trying to cut down and I was like, why can I not cut down? And it's because I can't just have one. And I'm the kind of person that finds it easier just to say no than to say maybe. So that was that. I just stopped. But with my ex, I do think I was addicted to sort of him and the whole external validation of being in that relationship, like having the nice house, having the nice life, having the holidays, having the kids, like everything fitted really nicely. And coming out of that was like this ridiculous emotional roller coaster. And I made some really terrible decisions even when I was sober. So I'm just so grateful that I wasn't drinking.
It's interesting because what you allude to is societal conditioning, and it was exactly the same point that I got to. Like I'm half Italian, half Irish, so family is very much be successful, have children, stay married your whole life. But that doesn't fit everyone, and I think I was always fighting against that. Um, and then I just realised that I was really unhappy in that position where everyone else was telling me, "Oh, you're doing so well, you've got everything." But at the end of the day, if you're not happy, you sort of know that deep down.
Mm.
And it's, yeah, I mean, we're all brought up thinking that that's how people view us as successful. But the truth is, I've been the happiest I've ever been when I was on benefits, because one of my businesses, after I got sober and left the finance world, got hit by COVID. It was a travel business that I'd set up. So I then had to do everything on a shoestring budget for a couple of years, while I was doing some other work as well. And it just showed me that you don't need to have all those things in your life to be happy.
Mhm.
If anything, less is more. So I'm more comfortable just with a book and being on my own, and with the puppy and the missus, than needing to go out and validate with other people, saying, talking about how the book's doing and stuff. I just like my little introverted life now.
Yes, I know what you mean. I mean, we're coming up to October and sober October and all that kind of stuff. Would you mind ending on kind of some tips for sober curious people? And if you want to, moving into sober dating, because um, I feel like when you're going through the roller coaster of ending a relationship, for me, it's not a bad idea to just stop drinking for a while. But obviously, that brings its own, um, I guess, something to be nervous about. You know, being sober and then going out to meet people is pretty scary.
It is scary, but I think I think once you tackle that, then everything else in life becomes pretty easy. Um, I think that for me was where I went from being this scared boy to then becoming a bit more of a man who was confident in what he didn't want, not necessarily what he wanted.
Mm.
Uh, but yeah, so in terms of sober dating, I strangely enough, through doing the 12-step program, I learned a lot. And I think a lot of it was centered around the fact that if you're not happy in yourself, that radiates. So if you're going dating and you're not really happy or you're not confident in certain areas, then that codependency can really, really kick up. And you're
Mm.
just looking for validation from people. If they don't text you straight away, you're worrying about this, that, and everything else, that they might not like you.
Mm.
Um, but I think with modern dating, you can filter out all those before you even get to the date. Um, I went through a process of going. I think I got addicted to dating, but that's just my personality. I am very all or nothing. And
Yeah.
it did feel towards the end of it like I completely burnt out and it was a bit soulless. But you understand what it is you do want. And I think after dating for about a year, I realised that I didn't want to date someone that drank. So then on my profile, I was just like, right, I know what I want. I want this. I want someone who's into spirituality a bit, who's a bit different. They're not your usual rat race lifestyle. They're working in sort of a corporate company and they work Monday to Friday and they do all that. So I just put exactly what I wanted on Hinge. Um, and then it's sort of that manifestation of what you want. If you don't put it out there, then you're not going to get it. So yeah, and then ended up meeting my missus. We've been together a year and a half. But it's just a case of, I mean, at the end of the day, it is a numbers game. I mean, like you can't you can't get too caught up in the fairy tales of it. I mean, there's times when me and the missus have arguments and we don't talk to each other for 10 minutes or whatever, and it's not. I think my realization of what being in a relationship is different to when I was in one originally. And we're a lot better at talking to each other. So if something does annoy us or we think there's um, something coming up, then we'll have a proper grown up chat about stuff. And that is so much better than my previous relationships where I would just shut down emotionally and not
Mhm.
talk about it. Then you're walking around with all these thoughts and stuff in your head as well.
Guessing what the other person's thinking.
Yeah, and it's such a negative way to be in a relationship. Like communication really is key. But with the dating side of it, like dating is fun. At the end of the day, like there were some terrible dates, there were some exciting dates, and there were some just really boring dates. But I think if you go into the mindset of thinking, look, I'm doing this because I want to meet someone, or you're doing it for whatever reasons, um, it's good, and you're doing it without having to reach for drinks as well. So you sort of know that you're going in there as a person that person is going to meet every time. Um,
Yeah,
where when I was drinking, I was a completely different person when I was drunk to
depending on
how
your
I am
age.
sober.
Yeah.
That's probably why I was single for the best part of 10 years when I was drinking.
Mm. And if someone wants to give not drinking a try for a little while, what would your tips be for that?
I think accountability. So from the personal training stuff that I've done, I think when people buy into a package, it doesn't have to be an expensive one. It could just be an online course or one of the journals that's the 30-day journal for 5.99 or whatever. Just give yourself that end goal and something that can keep you accountable along the way.
Mm.
Because accountability is really powerful coaching um, tool that people use. And I think if you do potentially do things in group settings as well, there's an extra layer of accountability with other people. There's plenty of sober courses out there for people. Just find one that you like.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I think courses are the best way of doing it. Courses in those um, 30-day journals, 90-day journals, um, because accountability really is key. I think I know from experience when you just say, "Oh, I'm going to be sober for 30 days," but all your lifestyle and all your friends still drink weekend to weekend, it's not really going to happen. You need to build in that accountability for it to stick. And then inevitably, I've not met anyone who regrets going sober. So it's literally one of those life changing things that if you really want to change every area of your life, then for the better, then quitting alcohol will do it from the physical to the mental side of things. I mean, like you'll know as well, it is bonkers how much you can change. And then you get all the nice benefits as well. You look younger, you feel younger. Um, with all that extra energy and stuff, it's really motivating.
Definitely. I literally don't know how I did it actually. Now that you're saying this, I'm like, it must have been some other bigger reason that I needed to quit, but I definitely don't ever regret it. Um, yeah, and I think it's massively helped my confidence in general. I think once you've worked out how to step into a room, a party, a wedding, anything like that without drinking, it's like it becomes your superpower. You're like,
Yeah,
I've already arrived ready to hit the dance floor. I'm just going to wait for all you guys to catch up.
yeah, and people are like, "Oh, you're not drinking? Strange."
Oh my God. And the conversation with family members is always hilarious.
Yeah,
You mentioned your gran in the book, and my
yes,
granddad recently turned 90, and he was like, he must have asked me 5 to 6 times on his birthday party if I wanted a drink. And then each time he'd be like, oh, yeah, that's right. You don't drink, do you? And then in the morning, he was like, are you hungover then? And I'm like,
yeah,
no, granddad. Of course I'm
yeah. It's funny a lot. My nonna's exactly the same. She's a proper Italian nonna as well. She's 96 years old, and she just can't understand how I don't drink. And like your granddad, she just asked me about 10 times, and I'm like, no, I'm still not going to drink.
not. Still don't want one.
No,
Yeah, it's just such a, um, yeah, they just grew up with it and it feels really odd, I think. And I do think my family didn't like the fact that it means you might have a problem. Um, like, why can't you just have one? And I'm like, it's just better for everybody if I don't.
To some extent, it's like a mirror. So you're not drinking makes someone like the uncomfortable questions start kicking in for family and friends as well. They'll start asking those questions that they've never asked. When you're in a group of family and friends that have always drunk together, no one ever asks, "Oh, I think you're drinking too much." Like people normalize it. Oh, you got really drunk last night. You were hilarious. You throwing up and making an idiot out of yourself. Take that out of context. It's actually not fun. It's not hilarious, and you're in a world of pain. But because you're in a group of people that normalize it, it's different. So when you've got one black sheep that suddenly stops drinking, then the questions start hitting in, and sometimes it can bring up quite uncomfortable things for people. But in true style, they'll just ignore them. But I don't know. Have you got anyone in your family that you might think, oh, I think they drink too much?
No comment. Doesn't everybody?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just not a fan of alcohol at all, but I'm happy for people who can have a couple.
Still haven't met those.
Exactly. But yeah, when I first sat down to read your book, I was like, I got that feeling of, it's really exciting. You know, when you've just finished a series and then you realize your friends never watched it.
Yeah.
It's that kind of feeling of like, there'll be some people out there who really would love to just quit. And I think if they read your book, they'll get that like permission and see that there is a way of doing it where you can quit and not, I don't know, just life is much better. So I'm going to link to that in the show notes so that people have got that available to them if they are interested. So, but overall, thank you so much for coming on and chatting with me. It's very interesting to hear, particularly on the relationship side, from your perspective, what that can be like. So yeah, really, really cool. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on.
Okay, have a great week, and I'll see you next time for another episode of Happily Ever After with me, Hannah Harvey. I would be forever in your debt if you could leave a review and subscribe, as this helps more people find our podcast. And of course, if you have a friend who might enjoy this episode, please do recommend they listen too. And for anything else, any thoughts on this episode or questions for further episodes, you can get in touch with me through either Instagram @mumsdays or via my website hannahharvey.uk.